that we were on the verge of putting the government back in the hands of people and that our leaders were taken away from us. For over 6 decades, the Kennedy name has been synonymous with civil rights leadership and guardianship of the American dream. For the first time in my life, I believe we have the opportunity to restore these traditions to our highest office. Now I have a question for y'all. Who wants to see a Kennedy back in the White House?
I want to repeat and clarify what Rhonda said, which is that I'm going to do a selfie with everyone here that wants to take one right after I speak. And we're going to file up here into this room. It's nice and cool in there. And we'll do it really fast. We did 600 people in 24 minutes in Charleston. Just got to keep moving. I'm very grateful to Adam and Matt Woolsey for allowing us to use this and for making us so welcome at this ranch. And I especially want to thank everybody here who come out. I think it's 100 degrees today, and I'm so touched that so many of you would come out on Sunday and stand in this heat. And I'm just very, very grateful to you. I had a chance to talk to Adam a few minutes before I came out here. And he said that he's just grateful that somebody is running for president who gives him a hope of ending some of the division that is tearing this country apart. We have the greatest polarization in this country that we've had at any time since the American Civil War. And both sides are involved in it, and most of the American people don't want it. They want to find something, they want to do what I'm trying to do with this campaign, which is to find the values that we all share in common rather than focusing on the things that, the little issues that tear us all apart. A lot of those cultural war issues are like subject and keys, issues like, even the issues that are important to all of us, that are used to divide us, like guns or abortion or trans issues or immigrants or whatever. They're like somebody jangling the keys over here while they rob the bank, and none of us are looking. So if the king and queen look over the wall of their castle and all of their subjects are fighting each other, they go back to the party and they pop champagne. Because as long as they're all fighting each other, nobody is coming over the castle wall. And, I want to lead a movement to go over the castle wall and take our I was in San Francisco about 3 weeks ago as part of the campaign. And in 2018, I spent most of the year in San Francisco trying the 3 Monsanto cases. We tried them one after the other, and then we started out with about 2,000 cases. And the way the multi-district litigation works is you just keep trying them until the company comes to the table and settles all of them. And we tried 1, 2, 3 in San Francisco. So I was living there most of the year. And every morning before court, I would go down to Union Square to exercise. And there's a gym down there, and I would see all that. Union Square in San Francisco is like Fifth Avenue in New York. It has all the shops. It's the place where tourists come from Asia, from all over the world to visit San Francisco. It has all the big iconic American stores like Nordstrom's, Macy's, Gimbel's, Gap, Old Navy, Levi, and then it has the big foreign brand stores like De La Valle, Prada, Gucci, Burberry, Ferragamo, and all the others. And I went back there 3 weeks ago, and it was a wasteland. every one of those stores is now shut. And it's just acre after acre of plywood. It's like if all of the shops in New York City and Fifth Avenue shut down overnight. It looked like, I visited a lot of communist countries, like Cuba and Poland, etc. And it's like a city without stores. That's what you see in communist countries. There's no retail in communist countries. There's cities with no stores, and that's what San Francisco looks like today. And and it's happening because the homeless on the street have created this extraordinary level of chaos. So after I saw this very, very dramatic experience, I started researching about why is there so many homeless. There's 525,000 homeless in this country, but half of the unsheltered homeless are in San Francisco. In California. California only has 12.5% of our population, so why does it have half the homeless? And I had all these assumptions about homelessness. It was linked to drug addiction, linked to mental illness, linked to poverty. I've heard these stories that if you're homeless in New York, if you lose your home in New York, and you don't want to sleep on the grades, you spend your last few bucks on a bus to San Francisco, so that you can get the good weather. And then also, there's very, very generous social service system in San Francisco, and that attracts people from all over the country. I also heard at places like Austin and Dallas, I don't think this is true, but that when they find homeless people, when the police find homeless people on the street, that they put them instead of putting them in jail, they put them on a bus to San Francisco. This is what people say in San Francisco. I don't know if it's true. But anyway, my son, I was talking at our dinner table about that, and my son, Connor, said to me, made me read these books by an author called Matthew Desmond, who spent his whole life studying homelessness. He's written a brilliant book called Evicted, and then done a number of podcasts. And what he's done, these extensive studies of the homeless in San Francisco with the University of San Francisco, where they literally went out and he interviewed most of the homeless people in San Francisco. And what he says, what he shows in that book, is that homelessness has very, very little to do with drug addiction or with mental illness or with, although a lot of people who are homeless become mentally ill, and a lot of mentally ill people do become homeless, but the vast number of homeless have nothing to do with that. And for example, West Virginia has a much higher level of drug addiction than San Francisco, and yet it doesn't have a homeless problem. Detroit too. Detroit and West Virginia have much higher poverty rates than San Francisco, and yet they don't have homeless problems. And when they interviewed people who are homeless in San Francisco, they found that almost all of them are from San Francisco, almost all of them. So they're not coming from elsewhere. So the question is, why is there a homeless problem in San Francisco? But Desmond shows that in every case where there's homeless problems, there's a direct correlation between access to housing and the cost of housing. And it is a function of rising housing prices. And what Desmond says is the chaos and the disintegration that we're now seeing in San Francisco is about to roll like a tsunami across this country, because the price of housing is rising beyond any historical precedent. 2 years ago, the average cost of a house in this country was $215,000. Today it's $400,000. And the interest rates have gone from 3% to 7%. So I have 7 children, most of them between the age of 20 and 30, 32. I have a 39-year-old who has a home, but none of my younger children are even thinking of getting a home. And none of their friends are thinking of getting a home. When I was growing up, all my friends that age were planning a strategy for getting a home. And the American dream that people my age grew up with, is that if you work hard and you play by the rules, and you'll be able to finance a home, you'll be able to take a summer vacation, you'll be able to raise a family and put something aside for your retirement on one job. I don't know any kid, my sons and daughters age, who believe that that promise applies to them. Their big worry is paying off their student loans. They have no conception that they'll allow, and we all know people that age who should have moved out a long time ago, but are still living with their parents. And we also have all heard stories of somebody, a friend, or maybe it happened to you directly, who was about to put money down on a home or go into escrow or sign a contract, and at the last minute, somebody comes in with a cash offer and snatches that home off the market.
BlackRock.
And when you try to figure out who is that, it's an LLC with an ambiguous name. And this gentleman is right. When you trace the breadcrumbs to find out who actually owns that LLC, it's one of three companies: BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard.
Boo! Boo!
These companies collectively, they own each other. So it's really one large company. They also own 88% of the S&P 500. So they own the entire business infrastructure today, the corporate business infrastructure of America. Now they've decided on two new targets. They want to buy all the farmland in our country, control the food supply, but they also want to buy all the single-family homes. And today we are on a trajectory that within 6 years, 60% of the single-family homes in this country will be owned by those companies. And your son or daughter who's trying to buy a home is competing against BlackRock. BlackRock has a bank pay. The cost of money to BlackRock is 30% less than the cost of money to the richest person you know. They have a credit rating that is beyond the highest credit rating. So your son or daughter has to now go compete against that company for the cost of money, and they can't do it. And they're being pushed into the rental market, and the rents are now going skyrocketing because of that pressure. 48% of renters in this country have lived with daily anxiety about their capacity to continue to pay the rent. And this isn't what America's supposed to look like. Thomas Jefferson said American democracy had to be rooted in tens of thousands of independent freeholds owned by individual Americans and families, each with a stake in our system of government. Home ownership is critical to this country in so many ways. One, because if you own a home, you're vested in that community. You care what happens to the hospitals. You care about the schools. You care about the police. You care about what your home looks like. You care about your neighbors. And if you don't have that ownership, if we no longer an ownership society, we become a feudal model, the model that we fought a revolution to break away from, the model where the aristocrats and the oligarchs own everything, and that we're no longer citizens, we become subjects. We become serfs on our own land. And that is where we're headed today if we let this new aristocracy, this corporate kleptocracy, take over our country in conjunction, in collusion with the regulatory agencies that are supposed to protect us against those kind of outcomes. So I'm running today against two presidents who both served a term in office and are both running on the platform that they brought extraordinary prosperity to this country. And, I spent a lot of my time talking to regular Americans. Long before I was running in this race, I was sitting at kitchen table with people because I represent, this is what I do. I sue big corporate polluters and malefactors. on behalf of regular people who've been injured by their recklessness and their illegal behavior. So I'm representing today 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. Until recently, I was representing, until we won the case, 1,000 families in Smelter, West Virginia, who were poisoned by a zinc smelter there owned by DuPont. I'm also representing in another case against DuPont, 10,000 families in Ohio and West Virginia who've been poisoned by PFOAs and PFASs. And I'm representing people like that all over the country. So I end up sitting a lot at kitchen tables with people and hearing their stories. And I, almost once a week, I talk to elderly people or their children who are cutting up pills to make their prescriptions last through the week so that they can pay for food. People are having to make these terrible choices between food and gasoline, food and medicine. Young couples who are sitting in rental apartments they can no longer afford and listening to their baby crying in their arms and having to talk to each other and wonder about whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. Today, the average income in this country is $5,000 less than the cost of living. So basic human needs, food, transportation, and shelter. If you're paying the base minimum for those things, you come out at the end of the year $5,000 in debt on average. The average American is $5,000 in debt after paying for those things that people are living paycheck to paycheck and they cannot pay. And so what do? They put that $5,000 debt every year on a credit card. And Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, and Morgan are charging them 22% interest. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking and they'd go to prison. But for these companies, it's business as usual. And who do you think owns all of those companies? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So they're doing it right in front of us. They're strip mining the wealth and equity from the middle class in this country and privatizing it, and then charging us wealth for everything. And the CEO of BlackRock has $10 trillion under management. The GDP of California is $3 trillion. So BlackRock is more than 3 times the size of California, and California is the 5th largest economy on earth. So these companies are bigger than any nations, except for maybe 1 or 2. And the power that they wield is the power of deities, of gods. And during the pandemic, we saw what they did. They came in and they shut down 3.3 million businesses in our country. They shut down their competition, small business. They declared war on it. And they taught us for 2.5 years. They taught us all, they trained us. It was a training session on how to use Amazon. And it's wonderful, it's magical. You just push a button on your phone and whatever you want is delivered within 24 hours. And we all walked into that trap. We closed down the local retailer. The guy who actually pays taxes in this community, supports this community, the schools, the firefighters, the police, all the things we care about. He's the guy who employs your son or your daughter during summer vacation. He's the guy who has the plaque from the Boy Scouts on his wall because he supports them, thanking them for his support. He's the guy who pays for your son or daughter's Little League jerseys, their hockey uniforms, and we shut them down. And Amazon, which played this key role in it, was censoring books like mine that criticized the pandemic response to lockdowns. Amazon, while it was doing that, was pocketing billions of dollars and shutting down all its competition. And how much how much money do you think Amazon pays in this community in taxes every year? Zero. But at least they pay federal taxes, right? Zero. Last year, Amazon paid zero. So that they're just, like I said, they're doing it right in front of us. They're strip mining the wealth from our country, and they're destroying the middle class in the process. And all of the things that we value, our democracy, our rootedness in these communities, our bondedness to each other, they're atomizing and fragmenting us and deliberately orchestrating the polarization that keep our eyes off what they're actually doing to us. And, you know, I saw President Biden the other day in Hawaii when he came back from Vietnam, and he did a 9/11 ceremony in Hawaii. And he said, he repeated something George Bush had said 20 years ago. He said, they did it. The terrorists blew up the World Trade Center because they hate us for our freedoms. And that's propaganda. That's not true. And I went on a national TV show with Neil Cavuto a couple days later, and I said, that's not true. I said, Osama bin Laden was really clear about why he bombed the World Trade Center. He said he bombed it because we put troops in Mecca. He didn't hate us. He said he was our ally during the Afghan war against the Russians. He liked our country until we put troops, 2 bases, right outside of Mecca, which they're a sacred city. And he said that the Quran required him to make war on any infidel who invades Mecca. So, and that's why he did. He was very clear about that. And, you know, we have 800 bases around the world. Each one of them is a platform for a new war, which has become the function of our intelligence agencies and our military-industrial complex. They keep us in this constant state of war. So, when I was a boy, I went in 1964, I was 11 years old. And I went to Poland, which was a communist country, with my father, my mother, and 3 of my siblings. And we left 9 of them at home. And we went to Poland. We weren't invited. My father went against the objections of the Polish government. He went at the invitation of a human rights group over there. And the Polish government was so distraught that we were in the country that they blacked out all news of us on the state-owned media, which is all the media in Poland. And in fact, before we went to Poland, my mother took us shopping. This was a period, the center of a period in American history that economists call the Great Prosperity, and social scientists. It was a 50-year period after World War II when the American middle class became the greatest economic generator in the history of mankind. When my uncle was president, we owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. We were the biggest exporter of goods on earth. In some years, we exported more goods than all other nations combined. This lasted until 1971. And everybody wanted our goods. When I traveled abroad with my dad and mom, people would come up to me and offer me money, huge amounts of money for my blue jeans. They wanted transistor radios that we made in our country. They wanted RCA Victrola record players. They wanted American cars with the gold standard car on earth. Everybody wanted it, but what they wanted more was our leadership and our moral authority. People wanted that all over the world. They knew the difference between leadership and bullying, and they trusted America to give them leadership. By example. And when we went, right before we went to Poland, my mother took us to shopping in Washington, D.C., the older kids, to buy gifts for the children in an orphanage in Warsaw. And we were very excited about bringing blue jeans and clothes and toys to these kids. But the Polish government was so worried that when we showed up at that orphanage, they had removed all the children because they didn't want us to have any contact. The Polish people have contact with Americans. And then 2 days later, we went to Krakow, to the Cathedral of the Black Madonna, to see the cardinal there, who was a living saint. He had stood up to the communists, he endured torture, he had, and jail, and he had endured it with such piety and dignity that he inspired this extraordinary resurgence of religious faith, religious fervor, and the Catholic faith throughout Poland. And everybody knew that when he died, he was going to be beatified by the church and become a saint. So for us little Catholic kids, it was the greatest thrill of our lives that we were actually going to meet a real saint. And we went to that cathedral, and we went up into the cathedral. Krakow Square was dead empty. One of the biggest squares in Europe. It looked like a mile long. And we went in, we had our meeting, our audience with the cardinal, and 4 hours later we came out, and there were 1 million people waiting for us. And the word of our president spread by word of mouth. The entire city of Krakow had emptied out to come see us. And the embassy car was caught in this sea of humanity and couldn't move, and we stayed there for hours. My father hauled us up on the roof of the car, of the limo, and he gave a speech, and then they started singing to us. They sang Stolat, which means may you live forever, again and again. And then they began singing the Polish national anthem, which was a criminal offense at that time. And they sang it again and again and again for hours. And I watched this extraordinary electrified crowd with tears coming down people's faces, trying to get close to our car, trying to touch something American. And they did not hate us for our freedoms. They loved us for our freedoms. And we went on that trip to France and Germany and Italy and Greece and Britain, and we saw the same thing everywhere, this huge outpouring of love for the United States of America. And, part of that was my uncle's decision to not project military power abroad, to keep our country. My uncle was asked by his best friend, and Bradley, what do you want as an epithet on your gravestone? And he said he kept the peace. He said the primary job of the President of the United States is to keep the country out of war. He said he didn't want children in Africa and Latin America and Asia, when they heard the word United States of America, to think of a man with a gun. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Kennedy Milk Program, which provided nutrition to millions of malnourished kids around the world. He wanted to think of the Alliance for Progress, USAID, which my uncle created to end run the oligarchs and the military governments and directly aid the poor and help build middle classes in all these countries. And my uncle succeeded despite enormous pressure during his years in the White House to keep Americans out of war. He never sent a single combat soldier abroad. He stayed out of Laos in 61. He kept us out of Cuba in 61 and 62, Berlin in 62, and Vietnam, where they wanted 250,000 troops, even his closest friends. If I was the most trusted Max Taylor, Abraham, and Bob McNamara all said, you got to put 250,000 troops in Vietnam or the government's going to collapse. And he said, it's their government. It's not our fight. We don't want them to collapse, but it's not our job. And he sent 16,000 advisors and most of them Green Berets, and they were not allowed to participate in combat, although so many of them did. And in October 22nd of 1963, he learned that one of those troops had been killed one of the Green Berets, and he asked his aide, Walt Rostow, for a casualty list, and they came back and 75 had been killed. And he said, that's too many. And he, that afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263 and ordered all American personnel out of Vietnam. A month later, he was killed. A week after that, President Johnson remanded that order and then sent 250,000 troops. My father ran against that war in '68, was killed. Martin Luther King died as a peace activist, died 2 months before him. And then Nixon came in, put 560,000 troops there, killed 1 million Vietnamese. 56,000 of our troops never came home, including my cousin, George Keiko, who died at the Tet Offensive. And we started down a pathway there towards the pathway that Eisenhower had warned us against, of the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would turn America into an imperium abroad and a national security state, a surveillance state, a garrison state at home. And that's where we are today. And we've committed in March $113 billion to Ukraine. Now that same month, we cut 30 million Americans from food stamps. We cut 15 million from Medicare. We gave another 300 billion, twice what we're sending to Ukraine, to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. So we have a lot of money when the bankers need it. And we have a lot of money when the military-industrial complex needs it. But when working people in this country need it, we don't have that. Just for a frame of reference, our entire budget at EPA is $12 billion. The entire budget at CDC is $12 billion. So that's what we have. That's all we have for the environment in this country. That's all we have for public health. I'm not saying they spend it well, because they don't. I'm going to change that. But that's all we got. And we're sending 12 times that to Ukraine for a war that should have never happened. A war that we helped provoke and then we torpedoed when the Russians tried to settle it. As a result of that, we're seeing suffering, that all of that money, when Mitch McConnell was asked in March, can we really afford to send $113 billion? And by the way, President Biden is asking right now for another $24 billion and promised it to Zelensky this week. And the top Republicans exempted it from the budget negotiations. The only thing that's exempt is that $24 billion. Well, when Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to send $113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry, it's not really going to Ukraine. It's going to U.S. military contractors. Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed. So it's really benefiting our country. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? Block, State Street, and Vanguard. And we gave it to them in the form of a loan. Raise your hand if you think they're gonna pay back that loan. Right. That wasn't even ever a discussion. So, well, why do we give it to them as a loan? Because it allowed us to put conditions on how they govern their country. So we forced austerity programs on it to make sure none of that money ever reaches poor people in Ukraine. But more importantly, we require them to liquidate all of their government-owned assets, beginning with their farmland. Ukraine has the finest farmland in the world, the richest. It is the breadbasket of Europe. There have been wars for thousands of years fought over that farmland. And today, our government, through these contracts, has required Ukraine to put that farmland on an auction block. And since the beginning, 28% of that land has been transferred to small farmers to corporations. And who do you think the biggest corporate purchaser of that farmland?
Bill Gates.
BlackRock. So now we see the game that has been rigged against us. And meanwhile, regular Americans are living in a state that is, 57% of this people in this country cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. And if you're living like that, and the gas light comes on in your car, it's like the apocalypse just happened to you. Because you know you're not going to be able to pay that mechanic. And you can see what's going to happen. You're going to lose the car. You're not going to be able to get to work. You're going to lose your job. And then you're going to lose your home. And you're going to end up on the street just like all of those people in San Francisco. That's how they got there. They just had a few weeks of bad luck. And all of you have had the experience of driving around when the fuel gauge is on empty in your car. And you know that it focuses your attention. Because you're just thinking, how the heck am I going to get to that gas station? What's going to happen if I don't make it? Now compound that anxiety by putting 2 kids in the back of the car, one of them a toddler and a baby seat. And then amplify it more by you're driving through a bad neighborhood. Well, that's the level of anxiety that most Americans, half of Americans, are waking up with every day with a sense of impending doom. And they're living like that all day. And they know, every one of them knows at some level of consciousness that this system has been rigged to do that to them, to put them in that place. And they don't know exactly how it's happening. You all know how it's happening. And that's why you're following this campaign, because you know what's happening. When you were watching all the Republicans debate 2 weeks ago, and they spent the whole time talking about how they were going to get tough on women, or tough on Mexico, or tough on, migrants, or whatever, tough on drug dealers, none of them talked about what's really happening. None of them talked about BlackRock. None of them talked about the disintegration that's happening in mental health in this country. None of them talked about the fact that we were all being systematically poisoned and propagandized by big ag, by big food, by the regulatory agencies that are supposed to be protecting us, by big pharma. And I am going to put an end to this system. You look at the metrics of this campaign, and we are doing better than any campaign out there today. We have 200,000 volunteers across the country, 10 times what anybody else has. We're getting crowds like this all over the country because Americans are ready for a change, and I'm going to give it to them. I've spent my whole life suing these big corporations and the government agencies that enable them. And when you sue a company like that, I've sued almost every one of these agencies: DOT, USDA, FDA, CDC, NIH, EPA, FCC, and I beat them in court. And when you are suing somebody like that, it's like getting a PhD in agency capture and how to unravel it. And I know how to do it, and I am going in there for one reason. I never intended to run for president of the United States. I did it because I saw that was happening, and I realized that I was in a unique position to fix it. And that's all I care about.